All right, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to Great Minds Session 9, The Lost Art of Training. My name is Darren Adair with American Hospitality Consulting. Thank you for being here. Just a reminder, this show is being recorded on September the 7th, 2021. So this evening, we're going to be talking about training. It's a topic I know we've talked a bit about before, but the reason to bring this up again is I've seen a lot of things on LinkedIn, a lot of things on Facebook, a lot of personal situations that I've dealt with where it just seems training has really become a lost art and we're not being as effective as we maybe once were. Joining me tonight as our guest panelist is somebody who has had a lot of experience with training, who knows his hospitality business. He is the co-founder of Real Hospitality Network and the host of Real Hospitality Live. So Chef Jason McBride. Jason, welcome to Great Mind Sessions and thanks for being here this evening.
Thank you for having me, my friend. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Yeah. So, what I really wanted to start off with is what do you think, or why has training really suffered over the last little while? Because it seems that it's just progressively, and this is maybe a bit of an assumption that that's the reason why, but in talking to people and in being out there, I've seen that it's maybe not getting the level of importance that it used to in our industry.
Right. I think there's two answers to your question. The first one is that operators don't necessarily know how to onboard and train properly. And in my book, it begins right at the very first day of literally going through, this is where the staff washroom is, to this is our menu, to these are all of our people and this is our philosophy, this is what we do. And the other part of that is I think that a lot of what I like to call investment fund restaurants are looking at dollars and cents, and they don't see the value in putting money into training hours. And you end up having, and I've said as a joke for many, many years, Betty, follow Brittany, and she started here last week.
Yeah.
and that's what you get. We went to a restaurant when things reopened for the first time here in Calgary. And of course, we want to be supportive. We want to get out there and we want to, show that we're out there, spending our money at local restaurants. And I went to what's a Western Canadian chain. I won't tell what they are. But when I went to have lunch at this place, the girl there hadn't been retrained. She hadn't been refreshed. She forgot most of what the menu was. And the service was poor at best. And this is an organization that you would think that they would really put the money in. Right. And one of the things that I've done, is advocate for people to take a look at this as a problem, because it really is. We're losing money as an industry in a ridiculous way because the effort's not being made.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes it's hard to put a dollar value, or it's not hard to put a dollar value because what your recruitment cost should be, right? You know how much it's costing you to find those people. You know what it's costing when you lose those people. So maybe we don't put the effort into, really putting the dollars and cents to it, because I think that's the part that's missing. Guys, while we're talking, if you've got anything you want to share, any questions for myself or Chef, or if you want to share some of your thoughts, just hit the raise hand button or put something in the chat, and I'll bring you into the session to discuss. And we definitely want to hear your thoughts on this topic, and what have you experienced and seen in the industry and in your own businesses. So how do we go about changing this? Like, what are the ways that we can help the industry get back to the way it was? Because I remember, a long time ago, and you and I talked about this the other day, when I first started officially in this industry after I finished university in Toronto, and I was at the Royal York, there was a very specific training program, right? And I was actually trained by Canada's only certified butler right now on how to work in that hotel and the procedures. And then when I went to Tim Hortons, it was a 8-week intense from A to Z. Here's everything you're going to do in this restaurant, plus time in restaurants after that. So what do you think, we can do to kind of get back to some of that? Does it have to be back to that full extent, or is there some happy medium? What would you like to see?
I think we need to be having conversations like this, and we need to be having conversations about it, because I think it's something that has become so laissez-faire and so much apathy towards it in hiring both front of house and back of house staff, that the effort and the thought isn't put into it. And I've been saying this as well, that you would, in no other industry would you hire a new hire and put them out to deal with your customers the same day or the next day or even the same week. So
Right.
whether you're selling cars, whether you're selling restaurant equipment, whether you're selling, doesn't matter what it is. These people are the face of your operation, talking front of house, of course.
Right.
And you would never have a representative of your business if you were in any other industry started yesterday or 2 days ago to go out and represent you to your paying customer who is completely untrained, doesn't know where the food comes from, doesn't know how it's made, doesn't know how big the portions are, doesn't
Right.
know what your story or philosophy or anything to do with your operation. No other industry would do that because it wouldn't survive. And
Right.
I often say this, there's a reason why many operators struggle in this industry, because they're missing out. They're missing out on the experience that people come to the operation for. They're missing out on the story, and they're missing out on the sales. There's 3 things about hospitality, and I teach this. There's manufacturing, sales, and love. If you don't have those 3 things, you're doomed.
Definitely. Anton, did you have a point you wanted to share?
Yeah, just kind of circling back to some of the comments from Chef Jason. Back in the day when I started in the food service industry, I received the exact same training. I was like, well, there's Bob, mirror him and, see what he can do. But then the chain I worked for sort of evolved, and we had a bunch of very cheesy videos to watch.
Right.
And it was full training for front of the house, back of the house. And I think where people are, well, the biggest breakdown at that point was, if the manager is too busy and he's running around like chicken with a head cut off, he's not going to have time to train. So that's where it's kind of where the balls are being dropped, and then it's pretty hard to catch up. And then some people don't even want to invest in training until they see staff sticking around for a bit, and maybe kind of weird. People go a little backwards on that instead of, I brought it up last time when I was here. Why would I want to train somebody and they will leave? Philosophy should be, what if you don't train them and they will stay?
Yeah.
I think that's where kind of it all comes down to ultimately.
Right.
Yeah. No.
And then it brings back consistency to business and to operations too.
Yeah. And that's exactly where my mind went to that very statement you just made. So, you bring up a good point, and I'm sure we've all been in this. I know I got caught in this. I remember when I first started working with the restaurant group, and we were short. We'd quickly grown the sales. I was hiring like crazy. And I had somebody that I said to him, listen, we had those training videos. We had them on CDs back then. I sat the person down at the computer and I said, listen, I want you to go through these few videos. I'm going to come back and check on you. If you've got any questions, come grab me. But I was out front dealing with guests, working in drive-through, working in storefront, doing everything. And all of a sudden, my drive-through window person looks at me and goes, is that the new girl running across the tracks? She took off out of the back door and ran away. So, I mean, I can appreciate that these things happen sometimes, but they're not best case scenario. And, maybe you're not going to be perfect every time, but we need to be more perfect than we are right now.
Yeah.
Right. And you're right. It is difficult right now. Restaurants have their managers, their owners are on the floor running the business. So having that time is more difficult. So how do you get around that? Like, what are some suggestions you guys have, or what have you tried in your own businesses to address that? Is it changing the time that you're doing this? Maybe you shouldn't be doing training during peak time. Right. Maybe you need to look at different things and I mean, there's no easy solution, but we definitely need to make strides forward, because what we're seeing out there is it's slowly deteriorating. And it is going to have even more of an impact on our business than we're currently seeing, in my opinion. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. It's training during peak times I don't know how people even think about that, maybe out of very strict necessity. But, I used to schedule my training either first thing in the morning at 9 before restaurant opens, or, between lunch and dinner rushes, because that's the most logical thing. One thing that I found working for me back in the days when I had kind of dedicated staff trainer. So it wasn't like the manager, general manager training, but it was kind of a more of a peer-to-peer, here we go, watch these videos and discuss them kind of thing.
When
Yeah,
I had a
Go ahead.
restaurant in Fort Mac, which is notorious for turnover, and of course we had to pay higher wages and whatnot there. And before I got there, the operation had a lot of turnover, and it was people would stay until it was payday, and the next day you could fully expect to be down a lot of people. They're never to be seen again because they caught the bus out of town or whatever it was. And at that point, I decided I was going to hire trainers and bring them on, and they were our staff trainers at that point, because really it was the only way that I could stem the flood of people coming and going, because they at least felt they were being looked after. I mean, it was the busiest operation that Cara Foods owned at the time. So, and that's a lot of numbers. So I really had to come up with a solution in order to do that. But one thing that held true with that particular brand was hostesses, for example, or hosts, always, it was mandatory that they were trained by the general manager, period. Not by one of the other hosts, not by a server, nothing. They literally had to be trained by the GM, and the GM was responsible for the hosts.
Interesting.
Great. So, as we're talking about this, and Chef, you started on this a little bit earlier, where should the training start? I mean, if we're going to make this change in our restaurants, what should we focus on first? And Chef, you talked a bit about, starts on day one, but does it need to start before that? Or some other things we need to look at before we can actually start addressing what's going on day one of training?
I mean, I guess it depends upon what the operation is. I think day one, you really have to have a thought out welcome package. Who are these people? Who are we? What do we want them to know? What do we need them to know? What's our philosophy? Where does our food come from? All of those things need to be a part of the conversation before you ever start talking about how many tables can you take. Right.
Yeah,
and then
definitely.
and when you get to the conversation about how many tables can you take, there's always, Karen who could take 12 tables, she can claim, and the service is always terrible, but she's running around like she's on fire. And the service level is just not there. You might be getting food to the table, but you're not really doing any selling. You're not doing anything other than, you could have just dropped off a tablet and had them bring their order in.
Yeah. I feel so bad for all my friends named Karen, but they take such a.
And that wasn't exactly Karen's. It just happened to be the one I pulled out of the air.
But some good points, because I had a server the other night who had been in the business a long time, and it was very much that I was there for her. She was not there for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this training, it's not just for the new people coming in.
Right.
It's got to be an ongoing process. It's got to be continuous, and it's got to be, for everybody. One of the things that I haven't seen or heard a lot of when I'm looking around for different training programs that are going on out there, and I'm not seeing this in the restaurants, and Anton, you touched on this, having that trainer and doing a train the trainer, making sure your trainer is properly trained on, not on how to do the job, how to actually train people. Do we need to look at a little bit more of that?
I think we do. Sorry, Anton, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking that, it might work for larger chains. I think there were the ones that spearheading the whole training process back in the early 2000s and late kind of 90s. But I just don't know if individual operator with, smaller footprint can't even afford that kind of stuff.
True. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a full 8-hour course, but it just, doing at least some research and making sure that person you're putting in charge has the skills, because we're famous for that. I've got this amazing server. Hey, you want to be a manager, right? Jim Taylor just wrote a bit about that today in his article. You're working in this industry, putting long hours, you're sticking around. Hey, you want to be a manager. A good server isn't necessarily a good manager. And the same would hold true. A good server isn't necessarily a good trainer. They've
Yeah.
got to have a bit of that skill and aptitude to be able to handle that, to communicate properly with those that they're talking to.
I had a conversation a few years back with my mentor, Chef Hans Myers, and he said to me, he goes, if I was going to open a restaurant now, I would not hire servers unless they had some kind of psychology degree. And of course, he's old school German chef, and everything is all the details that you never thought existed or never thought to think of. Anytime I have a conversation with him, I always learn 10 more years worth of knowledge in 10 minutes. But his whole thing was we don't put that effort in to find the right people and who have that education and who know how to work with individuals. And the same thing, I went back to university when I was 37 and took my degree in adult education. And that made me officially, in the world's eyes, have the education to teach people to do things. And I put that right back into hospitality. So, and the seminars that I do, I did a seminar in BC just before COVID came along for 300 operators in Victoria, Kelowna, and Vancouver, all of whom were super stoked about coming and learning about server training. And it's not that operators aren't interested in doing, in most cases, with smaller operators, they just don't know where to begin. So they just do with what they think they can come up with in the moment. And and again, there were 330 operators showed up to these seminars, and nobody was more surprised than me. And everybody had great questions, and it was all, where do we begin? There's no framework for this, right? So it comes down to knowing what the basics are, knowing what you want your customers to get out of the experience of coming to your operation, and building it from there. But the conversation has to be had, because we as an organization, we as an industry, have really dropped the ball across the board. If you ask anybody, where was the last time you had great service? And they'll go, okay, is that your favorite restaurant? Sure. And Brandon Steiner, when he was on my show, he goes, everybody's favorite restaurant is their last great experience. Before that, they probably couldn't find one that they thought was great.
Right. Yeah, good point. Eric, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to a couple of stories if I could. I work for a major restaurant. I saw the difference between the training, even with different franchises. The first one was, throw them in the fire, see if they burn. That was their training philosophy. And then the second one was, we're gonna train them between 2 and 5. We're gonna have a dedicated trainer, checklist. We're not gonna move on to the next step until they completed what's on the first checklist. And it's like the better the training was, the less stressful it was for you as a manager. Yeah. And it's like, why would you not be motivated to train people properly? It cause you less stress. So,
yeah, no, definitely good points. It does make it a lot less stressful. And, how much of it do you think is because some of us have that desire to want to take care of the guest, and we see them standing there and we want to have somebody there to serve them. We sometimes put the cart in front of the horse, I guess, where we want that body there to take care of the guest, even though we haven't set that body up to properly take care of that guest. Does that play into it?
I think we've gotten to a point where we really built up the industry to what it was 18 months ago, and let's have a conversation of what it was then. So we built it up to what it was 18 months ago by, in many cases, having programs in place and having things in place so that we could have a foundation for, as Eric talked about, having a training program in place so that managers can have an easier time of it, but also so that the operation runs better across the board. And again, those things started to gradually fall away. The less money there was, and the less education. So what we don't have is support from the bean counters, let's say, and we don't necessarily have a framework for operators to use. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I worked with a restaurant, $20 million restaurant in Calgary, and there's not a lot of those, so you can guess which one it is. And it's one of the most beautiful restaurants I've ever been in, ever. They made the general manager, because he happened to be a server at Highs for 100 years, had no idea how to speak to people, manage people, teach people. He said, "Oh, if you're working here, I just assume you know what you're doing." Well, every single operation you're going to go in is different. Now, whether you're behind the bar, whether you're on the floor, whether you're in the kitchen, everybody makes a ham sandwich differently. Everybody makes, this differently, that differently. Everybody has their own different way of setting a table. There used to be many years ago, this is the way you did it, and that's the way it was. But that's not the way it is anymore. And that particular location was horrible for turnover, horrible. And people hated this guy's guts because he was terrible at managing people. $20 million restaurant, and this guy's dropping the ball.
$20 million can get eaten away pretty quickly if you've got a lot of turnover and you're spending a lot of money on training and hiring. So, there's got to be a way to do a better job of making that quantitative, putting those numbers together to let people really see. Does anybody have a formula that they use? I don't know, Chef, if you have one, or if anybody else on the call has a formula that you've used to see, what am I spending on recruiting? What am I spending on training? What is turnover costing me? And to help kind of get to where you need to be.
I'm going to tell you, I had this conversation with Jim Taylor, who we all know, and Jim taught me more in 15 minutes about that than I ever learned in 35 years in this industry. Jim's your man to talk to, and I'm going to throw to him, because if you want to have a conversation about how to make sure that you are really getting the most out of your training and getting the most out of your people, and how much productivity you're having, and I know some of the people here watched the show where Jim was on, but Jim is the guy to talk to for that, because he can pull that out like so fast.
Just making people aware that those numbers are even there, though, I think is going to help with the situation, because, and I've talked to him about this, and I've talked to others about this, where people don't really know, right? We still use a lot of that gut feel in our industry, and we don't focus enough on really seeing what is happening, what the numbers are. I mean, it's not hard to figure out what your turnover was.
Well, Jim's philosophy is productivity versus labor cost. Right. Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. And when he said it to me, it was like somebody had opened the door and the sunshine came in. I went, right. Yeah. You're right. But that's not what I've learned over, again, 3 decades. The way that I learned it was labor cost, cut, make sure that, bill is cut at 7:15 and then at 7:30, you got to cut Jack, and et cetera, right? But when you look at it the way that Jim talks about it just makes way more sense.
Yeah, definitely. I wish he could have been with us tonight. He could have taken us through some of that. Oh, sorry, what was that? Oh, just some background. Okay. So, one of the things I wanted to hear from tonight, does anybody have, what is your ultimate horror story of the training you've received from, whether it was when you first started in this industry or somewhere in the middle of your career? I'd love to hear what some of the things that you've had to deal with when you're being trained for a new position in this industry. Does anybody have a good story to share?
I go first this time.
What's that? I mean, I know I shared the one that I had where the girl ran out the back door. I mean, I haven't, there's been lots of instances where people have not shown up, and we deal with all that stuff. And there's different reasons for that in some cases. But, those stories can help us determine the changes we need to make. Right? Because if something is happening, especially if it's happening on a regular basis, what are those things?
I'm going to make a comment and then kind of follow up with it. So one of the things that I talk about and I teach is be the lighthouse, not the tugboat. So be the example of the type of service and the type of atmosphere you want to have in your operation. So if you're a manager, you should be the example of how you want other people to act and what you want people to know in your operation.
Right.
Hands down. It's much easier to see somebody doing it the way that they want it done than it is to try and understand them telling you or putting it on some rickety CD. And I've had that happen. I mean, I've worked everywhere in the house. So front of house, back house, management, owner, franchisee, franchisor, all of the above. And the worst problems that I've seen across the board were when managers don't support their staff. So either they don't give them enough tools to do it well, or they're not there to support on the floor. If your manager's sitting in the office, and we all know that guy,
Yep.
get rid of him. The manager is not there to do that job. The manager is there to be on the floor, to work with the people, and also to make sure that the things are coming out of the kitchen the way they're supposed to be across the board. And it begins with teaching the management how to properly manage, and then carry it from there. But I've personally been in a couple situations as well where I've been serving on the floor or behind the bar. And one example, I worked in West Edmonton Mall 100 years ago, 26 years ago to be exact, actually. And I worked at a place where they gave me an 8-table section, and I was like, well, I can work an 8-table section, but it's not going to be pretty. And this is a place where you had to spend time with people, and you had to have a conversation with people, etc. And I asked the new manager that they had brought on, I said, look, I mean, I'm getting swamped here. And he goes, well, you're just not fast enough. I said, no, it's not that I'm not fast enough. It's that I'm actually taking time with the customers. He goes, well, you need to speed up. I said, look, I'm asking you for help. Are you refusing to help me? He said, yeah. He goes, I got other things I got to do. I said, well, fair enough. I said, you have an 8-table section to yourself now. Have a nice day.
And he was probably shocked that that was your response.
Right. So this is what it comes down to. If our managers don't know how to manage, and our managers don't know how to interact, and they're not table touching, and they're not teaching, and they're not the example, then how can we expect our staff to understand what we're expecting of them, and also understand the experience that we want our staff to have, or sorry, our guests to have? Because again, what we end up doing is oh, you were a manager over at Bing Bongs. Great. Well, come and work here. Well, you have to take that time to also train the manager, right? The training doesn't just, we can't just blame the host. We can't just blame Brittany, the server. Sorry, Brittany, et cetera, et cetera. We have to take the time to make sure that people know what their damn jobs are, right? We got to a place in this industry where it got to be where you had to have a certification. You had to have some kind of training. You had to have time in. You had to have hours in before you were allowed to be responsible for any part of the operation. In some cases, that was before you were allowed to wash lettuce. And we are completely gone from that. Completely.
Yeah. This whole conversation brought to my memory my experience with training myself. We had a group of restaurants. I worked at, hired Bob Brown. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He written a book, Little Brown Book of Restaurant Success. Okay. He's still around, but you know, there's 40 of us in one room listening to the guy. That was quite fascinating. That was my first experience with official training of the management. So that's, but you know what, kind of related to what you were saying, Chef, what if, and I don't know, specifically in Calgary or something like that, what if the industry pulls some money together and actually puts free courses for people that want to get into the industry, right? And then this way, you know, you can break it down into, you know, fine dining service, fast food kind of thing, or back of the house expectation, consistency, things like that, and just do kind of courses like that outside of the, or rather within the industry itself.
There's money available for that, Anton. I mean, there's, I used to do the Ready to Work program for the province of New Brunswick, and it was sponsored by and paid for by Post-Secondary Education and Training in Labor as well as EI. And it was 40 people at a time would come, and it was a 6-week-long program where everything was taught from service to first aid within that. And the people that left that program had an 80% success rate in finding and keeping employment within the hospitality industry in the province of New Brunswick. And it was a very successful program. And I think, I mean, what I saw was really shocking to me when I did the seminars for Cisco. The amount of people that came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, can you come and do training at our restaurant? Can you come and train our group? Can you come? Can you come? Can you come?" And there was a lot of organizations that came up to me after the fact or during our breaks and said, "Hey, can you come and can we fly you out and do this?" And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm not telling you anything magical here. It's all the basics.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you know this already? And how do you not know this and own 4 restaurants and a golf course?
Yeah.
It's surprising sometimes. You've both kind of said something, and Chef just mentioning Cisco, and I know US Foods has done some free training down here, but what about looking to the community to do some more of that stuff? Because I know, especially when it comes down to little independents, you're so focused on trying to do everything on your own. You don't look at what's Bob across the street doing, what's Mary over there doing, and looking at the different successes out there. What are, or who are some of the kind of the top, the gold standard when it comes to training? Who would you suggest that people look to and look at to help them develop a program for themselves?
I think it depends upon whether you're talking front of house, back of house. I mean, we all know Chef Dwayne Keller, who is a legend in the back of the house. He's one of the most highly respected chefs in the world, certainly in America. And I mean, even if you follow Keller, I mean, he's just a fantastic example of the human that you want to be. Like, at the end of the day, he's a guy who every 15 minutes goes down the line and supports and says, "Hey, you're doing a great job," or "Hey, can I show you this?" Or "Is there anything I can help you with? Do you need my support?" When he's managing an operation, this is a guy who's done 3 inaugural dinners for the White House. He cooked for Julia Child's 90th birthday, and he's run Gaylord hotels with thousands and thousands of people coming and doing operations there. That's a guy who I have the utmost respect in my heart for, and the industry does too, for back of house for sure. Front of house, I don't know. I mean, I can't say somebody else who I could pull out of a hat that's even doing the type of seminars that I'm doing.
Right.
I mean, there are people that come and they talk about operations. There are people who go and they talk about how to run your bar. Doug Bradkey's fantastic. He's also a friend. I love that guy. He's super supportive, and we support each other as much as we can. But I don't know who else is doing something in the service part of the training.
Well, it would be a little bit different depending on the segment of the industry you're in as well, right? I mean, I know.
No, I mean, I think
to a certain extent,
got to be there too. I mean, the seminar that I do, the workshop for Cisco is meant to be. It doesn't matter if you are in fine dining, if you're at a golf course, if you are at QSR. Those things have all been kind of addressed in there, right? Because it's really about connecting with people and teaching them how to do that, and also making sure that people have the tools to do so. So.
Okay, good. Anton, I saw you just shared something in the chat there. Link to the bar.
Yeah, that's that gentleman, Bob Brown. He's the
perfect.
Yeah,
thank you.
He's the gentleman that kind of had the biggest effect on me in my restaurant career back in the day.
For sure.
Awesome. Thanks. I know in the past, when I was first getting started, you'd hear about, these companies that had, or, if somebody sees this on your resume, no matter where else you go and work, they're going to want to look at you because they know that that restaurant or that company gives you such great training to set you up. Mm-hmm. Do we still hear that? Do even those companies have? I mean, I'm thinking about McDonald's. I used to hear that a lot. I know, like I said, with Tim's, we had great training. I'm not sure if it's still there to the extent that it was, but I don't think it holds the same as it used to. And even in that article that I read today, where it was talking about how there's so many transferable skills, having that is more of an understanding that the things that we do and in the way that our managers have to multitask, the amount of information they need to know, help in driving some of these programs that we're talking about, and even the need to do more training in this industry.
That's a great question.
Well, it used to be that McDonald's was a gold standard for training for QSR. Yep. And I don't know necessarily if that's true anymore. Certainly not from my experience of being a customer. When I was 14, I worked at McDonald's, and we had to go through a training program, and you weren't allowed to even go up and be near the cash register until you knew a certain amount of information. And the keg built their reputation on service. They're now owned by Cara. I don't know if that's carrying through, but I mean, the last several times that Robbie and I have been to the keg, and it's one of our favorite places to go because we always know that what we're going to get, and the service is usually decent and oftentimes is very, very good. I had the pleasure of going on a training seminar for when what was it called, bringing people from other countries to come in and work within the industry. So it was run by the federal government. So I happened to go there, and it was and the fellow who was the head of the training director for the keg was there at the time, and he and I had a great conversation about the success of their training program and how they had put it together, because I had previously worked at the keg at the time, and I said to him, I want to say to you, kudos that this is that in every place that I've been involved in or had interaction with, I mean, that's really been a really excellent standard, the way that they do things, because they don't just let you on the floor either. You have to take time, and you have to go through the store, and you have to understand how to even walk people through a menu properly. It's not, here's your menu and then I'll be back.
Right. Yeah.
Eric Eric, do you want to come on and talk about that? I mean, you put up a question there about how much of a problem is a result of managers not being trained properly, and as a result, just not knowing how to train. I mean, I believe in that. I think that managers don't necessarily know how to train, and I think the reason for that is because the person above them didn't take that as the gold standard either.
Right. That was mainly my question. Like, how do you feel about, like, where do you think this problem has started? Do you just think it started on managers being lazy and just not wanting to train? Or do you think that it's coming from corporations not having the money to, because I've noticed a lot of the companies that I used to work for, they didn't even like when you held like monthly manager meetings. Like, we just don't have the money for that. We don't have the money for crew meetings. We just don't have the money for all that. How much
I
is
see
this?
The industry, Eric, is divided. So, and I'm happy to say this across the board. I say there are what we call investment fund restaurants, Cara, et cetera, BP's now, Tim's now, et cetera, and then there are owner operator restaurants. And maybe the guy's got 3 or 4 restaurants in the same community or in the same province or state. So there's 2 different conversations there. And you're right that the money and the bean counters, as I say, has fallen away, and it's been, don't put so much money into training, et cetera, with the investment fund restaurant side, which is all the big franchise groups that we all know the names of. And then the other people, I think they just don't know where to begin, and they'd be happy to embrace it. I've had many, many conversations with operators who have said, will you please come and train my front of house staff?
Right, but you're teaching people the basics, and it's like, every one of us here right now, we know the basics. Sure. We wouldn't be making the money, we wouldn't be having the job that we do. We wouldn't be, teaching other companies the basics if, we didn't know it ourselves, and if the problem didn't exist, that they didn't know it anymore. So where do you think personally, where do you think it started? Do you think it started with managers just starting to be lazy, or do you think it started with the companies not putting the money towards it?
probably both.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to something that I was just thinking about it. I think some of it may have come to where you had the managers who were, following the processes. They had the programs trying to do it, but the ownership or leadership above them didn't really support. And I've experienced that before where, hotel chain that I worked for, we had this huge training program and I was traveling across Canada doing this training. And in the main hotel that I worked at, preaching all this stuff to everybody and everyone's getting all excited, but then the general managers didn't follow or believe in it.
Right.
Right. So, it can come from a few different areas. I think some of it right now could also be that we've got owners on the floor who maybe haven't had to work their business as much in the past and are now struggling to do it themselves and really don't know it as well as they need to. Because I haven't been as exposed to it prior to what's going on in the last 18, 20 months. So I think those are a couple of things that would play into that as well. I don't know what you think about that.
I think Eric makes a good point. I mean, about, and I just, sorry, I had a second more to think about it as well. And to add to your example, Darren, when I was opening restaurants for Boston Pizza, we would have, the managers come and do training at, of course, the corporate training center, and then we had to retrain them again when we got to location. And oftentimes the manager would be like, "Oh, I've already been there, and I'm not going to be a part of this." It was like, no. This isn't whether or not you know how to do it; it's about how you know how to teach it. And at that time, that was when BP's was opening 200 stores across, and so we had to make sure that manager knew how to teach that staff. And again, I mean, it comes down to, is this part of the corporate culture? Is this part of your restaurant culture? Because if it's not part of your corporate culture, then the lazy guys or lazy gals end up just not following up, and they're like, that's good enough. But if it's mandatory, then and that these particular standards are met, then it becomes part of the culture. And I think that a good portion of that culture is now gone, which is, of course, why we're having this conversation today.
Right. Anton?
Just kind of, again, want to mirror on what Jason said. Back in my Boston Pizza days, I think Moxie's was the gold standard for casual dining in.
Back when they were a burger joint.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what, the store opening training is fantastic. Like you said, it's definitely something that was very interesting, very engaging. But 6 months down the road, once you have a couple managers quit and you replace a couple staff, that's where it falls apart. So I don't know if it's necessarily managers being lazy, but in my experience, it's more of a managers being busy. And how do you justify to the ownership that you need to bring a couple extra people, on a schedule just to train a new person? I think that's where it kind of comes down to, just in my experience, not necessarily laziness or kind of not following the protocol, but just not being able to carve out time out of your schedule when you have to, open, serve, wash dishes, and do all the fun stuff that managers do.
I love that you made mention that 6 months later that the impetus isn't there anymore. When I left Boston Pizza, I actually went and worked with Boston Pizza franchisees to train their kitchen staff after the fact, and these were stores that had already been open, and they would pay me to come in and retrain their staff because the KM wasn't there anymore, or he wasn't keeping things to standard, and the operator, so the franchisee, would say, look, we need some help back here. We need to hire people. We need to train them. And either their KM didn't know how to anymore, or it was a new person, or they just didn't have the capacity to do it. So, and it wasn't my idea. It was one of the franchisees' ideas that you should come and just do training on your own. And I made way more money than working for corporate. And I went home to my own bed every night.
Yeah.
Good old days. And I think, that's one of the benefits when you're part of a franchise is you typically do get that. I know we used to have that as well with Tim's. You had an opening crew that would show up, but opening a brand new restaurant and what's required, the training and that, we really haven't touched too much on that other than some of the highlights we talked about compared to, an existing operation training in new team members. The approach is you're covering the same information, but when you think about what's involved in opening a whole brand new restaurant, you don't have anybody to rely on. Potentially, you're training everybody on those new processes. So you've got to really find a way to communicate and get that message across and be efficient with that. And it should be a longer process in my mind than what it would be for that one-on-one, because you've got that bigger group to deal with. So, any thoughts on those openings? I think we lost Jason. I mean, I can remember in the old days.
When it comes to.
Yeah, go ahead, Anton.
No, I just kind of wanted to say that the opening of the restaurant, I know at Boston Pizza, we used to do the same thing with the reopening of a restaurant too. It happens every 7 or 8 years or after the remodel, but it was definitely another one of those needed things where, you have corporate guys coming in and train you. And I think that's where I mentioned the independent guys probably don't have enough resources, as you mentioned, to have that system set up. So where does the guy that's opening? Sorry?
Yeah, no, you're right. Or they don't know how to find, because there are those of us out there who can help with those things, but they don't know where to look to find the resources to assist them with that.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah. James, you had your hand up. Did you want to share something? And you are on mute, just so you know. Or maybe he's frozen or he didn't have anything, but James and I opened a lot of Tim Hortons restaurants over the year. I know he's opened several other restaurants, and when you're getting into that new, especially when you're dealing with the new franchisee or the new manager, there's so much to learn in that short period of time. And we used to give them 2 weeks of training. We were there 16 days, 2 setup days, and then 14 days of hands-on support and training. But there's just so much being shoved into a person's head. Even for that individual, when they first start out with a new business, you're giving them so much information in that short period of time. They're going to forget some of it.
Yeah.
There's things they're learning today they may not experience for another 2 months. So,
Yeah, and to kind of bring up a little different topic of conversation, when is it better to or rather, is it better to hire an experienced server and retrain them, or is it better to hire somebody brand new and train them to your procedures and your restaurant and your philosophy?
The answer to that is yes.
Yeah, because I remember, when you're hiring, you always look at the experience and see, it's like, well, this person worked in this chain, and, do we want to retrain them, or do we want to, do something a little different?
Yeah.
So it's always that conversation. Depends on how much time you have.
Yeah, and I'll share a bit, and then Eric will come to you. I think on that, Anton, I know I like to look at, their experience. Was it long-lived or short-lived? If they've got a lot of bouncing around, that's going to be a red flag. If they've got long tenure somewhere, then there may be some good opportunity. But you're right. Just because somebody has all that training, and I think Jason touched on this earlier, they're not trained in your restaurant.
Yeah.
Right. On your procedures, even within the same chains. Restaurant A is set up this way. Restaurant B is set up this way. So you need to invest and have a consistent training, I think, to make sure that everybody, and if it's that experienced trainer and they seem to be catching on a little bit faster, then you allow them to get on their own maybe a little sooner, but you're following and gauging that process as you go through. Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of talk about the system again. And I was just thinking about something about how when you're training someone, you're never going to be able to train them in every single circumstance that's going to come up, every situation that's going happen.
Right.
So it's almost like your system needs to be simple enough for them to be able to learn, as far as, how do they learn, and the multiple different ways that people learn. Some learn by over and over again, some learn by just looking at it, some learn by watching. So the system needs to incorporate all those things as well. But I think it also needs to not be so in depth that you're going to try and cover every single situation that happen. Sometimes you just need to let them figure those little things out as well.
Yeah, and I think you need to build a culture, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that see, hear, and do. Everybody has their different ways of learning. Some of them you can tell them, and they can do it. Others have to see it. Others have to physically do it. So I'm glad you bring that up, because it is an important part of doing that. But having an effective training program. But I think you also have to build that culture, so when they come up to maybe something you showed them months ago, and they haven't experienced since, or is brand new to them, that they're comfortable coming to the manager or somebody else in the team and saying, hey, I've never experienced this before. How should I handle it? Right. I mean, sometimes you're going to be on the floor, you've got a guest right in front of you, you're going to deal with it on the fly, and it happens sometimes. But if you've built that positive culture, that you can approach the manager, you can approach the owner, you can ask those questions, the comfort level is going to be there. And I think it's going to create that better morale within the restaurant itself. So,
yeah. And it probably has something to say for the culture of, or I guess the consistency of having staff meetings more often than not, because then that's where you can cover all those things that you have missed at the training, and follow up on that training too. Because I know that some restaurants do not have staff meetings at all, because they're so busy or short-staffed, and there's just no time for that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's important to set aside those those half hours in the afternoon once a week to go through things.
Yeah, communication. It's so important, and I know we all hear that, but it can't be said enough. So, well, folks, it is 5:56, so we got 4 minutes left. We've covered a lot of stuff, and I mean, there's no one answer to this, but we shared a lot of great things, and I appreciate the time that you guys have spent with us. Our next session is going to be on October and I got the date wrong earlier today, so I believe it's October the 5th. It's the first Tuesday in October. We're going to be talking about sustainability, and I've got some great guest speakers who are going to come in and talk about different ways that restaurants and businesses at all different, whether it's an independent to the larger groups, can get involved with sustainability in their operations effectively, without having to spend a lot of money, and have that positive impact. So I'm hoping you will all be able to join us on that. But are there any last thoughts before we end this off that anybody would like to share?
Consistency. That's one thing that somebody taught me a long time ago. Consistency. Yep. It's you shouldn't be jumping from being very good to being very bad. You have to stay consistent. That's consistent training on consistent procedures will ultimately help.
Most definitely. No, that's a great point. Thank you, Anton. Right. Anybody else who has something? Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I think also not just consistency, but being enough flexibility to be able to look back and go back, kind of relook at your training schedule and relook at your training.
Yeah.
Because the people you're bringing in are going to change as well. So you need to also have that flexibility to go back.
No. Yeah, that's a good point. Your training needs to change with the people, the times, your business, and be relevant to what's going on. So another great point. Thank you, Eric. All right, I did get a message from Chef Jason, guys. His internet completely dropped off. I don't know what's going on in Calgary, but he completely lost all internet, so he apologizes. I do want to thank Chef Jason for being our guest panelist this evening. I will be sharing this out with everybody as soon as I get the recording. If you would like to bring up a topic or if you'd like to be a panelist in a future session, please send me an email to greatmindsessions@gmail.com. and I would be more than happy to consider bring that topic. And if there's anything else I can do to help, reach out anytime. But I do appreciate everyone's time this evening. I wish you a great month. I know it's a busy time with kids back to school and everything else that's going on. So I thank you for taking the time with me, and I'll see you in October for our next session, Great Mind Session 10. It's going to be our 10th session. I'm looking forward to that. So everybody have a great evening. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Take care.
Bye.